Well, thank you, Dean, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. I always enjoy that response of the audience when somebody tells everybody we have 8 children. That ooh or the ah or the eyes light up, or how can that be? 6 of them are our biological children, and our last 2 that are just 5 years old were adopted from Guatemala. They're twins. As my wife and I went to back to school night the other night, we looked around and realized most of the parents could have been our children. And yet I will tell you, it brings great joy and delight in our lives to have those children. And as the dean talks about education, I will tell you the person being educated in our home is the old man. And it happens on a daily basis, as you can appreciate, the ups and downs of 16-year-old young ladies who love to play field hockey and lacrosse, and older boys who at 25 love to live at home and not move on in life. And I'm sure no one here has ever had that experience, have you? That opportunity to have them come home whether you want them home or not. But so we have a great time in our home, and that's one of the joys and pleasures, even though we have the ups and downs of modern society and some of the issues we grapple with in our professional lives as well. It's a privilege to work in the oil and gas business today, and we've had our challenges over the past few months, and we'll talk about some of those today. But at the same time, we're critical to the well-being of our economy and the well-being of this great state, particularly with the Fayetteville shale issues that you have before us. So energy is key to all of us. It's the basic foundation that drives what we do and how we live. And so in my prepared remarks today, I hope to touch on a few of those, and then to the extent you can, take some questions, attempt to answer those. Tom Parker, who's here with us, he'll answer anything I can't. I guess you're a native Arkansan, aren't you, Tom? So you can answer those questions. But it's a pleasure to be here. It's a very impressive institution you have here. It's my first opportunity to be here, and having the privilege to spend a few moments with the dean to hear about the great work that you're doing, not only locally on behalf of the state and other interests, but on a global basis. So thanks to what you do, and thanks to this great institution, particularly providing these forums. You know, President Clinton presided over a time in our history of extraordinary economic growth, and it was created largely by the private sector investment and innovation. The experience of that era is important for us to remember, because we need more private investment to rebuild our struggling economy and, quite honestly, to put our people back to work. My message to you this afternoon is that the U.S. oil and natural gas industry, which today supports 9.2 million American jobs, is responsible for 7.5% of all our U.S. gross domestic activity, can play an important role in rebuilding this effort and by producing here at home more of the oil and natural gas the nation will be demanding. So developing that energy would create thousands of jobs and return to the government at all levels, federal, state, and local, millions and billions of dollars in revenue. With deficits spiraling upwards, nearly 15 million Americans out of work, and stimulus dollars that have been less effective than all of us had hoped, increased domestic oil and natural gas development makes more sense now than perhaps ever before. Many Americans see the value. Oil and natural gas entities, businesses welcome the opportunity. However, government policies will largely determine how much companies are able to increase their investment in U.S. projects and how many additional new jobs can then be created. Some people may be skeptical about encouraging more development of America's oil and natural gas reserves. Some have gone so far to suggest that we're running out of oil. We don't have enough resources to make it worthwhile to produce it. We can't risk the environmental damage, some say, or we have better options in renewables. These concerns deserve a response. Oil and natural gas are perhaps the most versatile, beneficial forms of energy that Mother Earth has ever produced. They are the foundation of our transportation systems, They heat and cool our buildings. They generate much of our electricity, and they provide the petrochemical building blocks for thousands of our consumer goods. Petrochemicals are used to make everything from contact lenses to your computers to the clothing you wear. As I like to remind the students, the iPhones they use on a daily basis, the Blackberries, the stains and the coatings, the paints on the walls around us, even the very fabric of our clothing or the tablecloths all have a foundation in petrochemicals derived by and large from oil and natural gas. You're surrounded by them in your daily lives every time you drive your car or watch a movie at home. Oil and natural gas have been and continue to be the engines of economic development and wealth creation all around the globe. Between 1998 and 2008, China doubled its use of oil. India consumed 60% more, and nations with significant oil and natural gas reserves are as eager to develop them as we seem reluctant to develop ours. While important, oil and natural gas are not the complete answer to meeting our energy requirements. We need all forms of energy. Energy demand is growing. In 2035, the United States will consume 14% more energy than we consume today. World consumption is on an increasing rise. By 2035, estimated to need 40% more energy than we consume today. Renewable energy will certainly expand, but to meet the rising energy demand, oil and natural gas will continue to supply both the United States with most of its energy. In 2008, oil and natural gas accounted for about 61% of all of American energy. That comes from the U.S. Department of Energy. By 2035, it's estimated we will continue to provide over 55% of all the energy we consume in the country. Renewable energy, projected to increase almost 200% from its foundation in 2008, will still only provide 13% of our domestic demand. Now, some suggest we should accelerate our use of renewable energy, which we should. But some have also suggested a crash effort, something akin perhaps to a Manhattan Project. But the scale and costs of fully transforming our energy economy over the short term would be enormous. Even the nearly 200% increase in renewables our government projects by 2035 assumes continuation of large green energy subsidies and rapid technological progress. Experience tells us that shifting to new energy sources can take time. It took 75 years for oil to replace half of coal's portion of our energy mix once oil started being used more broadly. Let me reiterate, renewables are key and are very important. No one knows that better than the U.S. oil and natural gas companies, which have been investing in them for many years, long before green energy became a popular term. Biofuels, geothermal energy, solar power, wind, advanced batteries, you name it, our industry has aided the development of all those technologies. We understand our nation will use renewables in increasing amounts. We will be providing some of those renewables. But the energy reality is that oil and natural gas will continue to be the critical part of our energy mix well into the future. Given this reality, we essentially have two choices. Choice number one, we can encourage more production of our own supplies of oil and natural gas to help meet future demand, putting more Americans back to work and delivering substantial revenue to our government. Or, in the alternative, choice number two, we can accept policies that discourage development here at home, forcing us to import even more. That means spending more dollars overseas for oil and natural gas, weakening the nation's energy security, transferring potential U.S. jobs to foreign workers, and spurring growth in foreign economies rather than here in our own nation. The first option, facilitating more development domestically, is possible because there is plenty of oil and natural gas still to be developed in the United States. Estimates suggest that at current rates of production, there are 70 years of oil and more than a century's worth of natural gas recoverable here in the U.S. And if history is any gauge, these estimates are very conservative. Technology will continue to improve, upping the amount of recoverable resources available. What we cannot find or produce today, better technology will help us find and produce tomorrow. We've been warned for at least a century that we've been, quote, running out of oil, end quote. Some of you who have longer history, I know it's none of you in this room, but in 1914, the Bureau of Mines said that the nation's oil reserves would be exhausted by 1924. That and every succeeding prediction of resource exhaustion, and as you know there have been many, have all been wrong. Until a few years ago, the U.S. reserve estimates for natural gas alone suggested we would soon need to be importing more from Canada or overseas. Since then, the natural gas reserve estimates have multiplied thanks to technological improvements such as directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing that have given us access to huge plays of shale gas in many parts of the country, including here in Arkansas in the Fayetteville Shale play. We also have much undiscovered oil as well as natural gas in Alaska and in our offshore areas, which I might add outside the Gulf of Mexico have been little explored or developed because of government prohibitions. The first energy choice, more domestic oil and natural gas, also means, as I mentioned earlier, important benefits to our society and to our economy. Producing more of our oil and natural gas would mean lots of new jobs here in America and large amounts of revenue for our government. In 2008, ICF International studied the jobs and revenue potential of developing both onshore and offshore federally owned areas that have been off limits, some of which have been off limits for 30 years. The study shows that full development could support as many as 160,000 new jobs by 2030, while increasing oil production by 2 million barrels a day. 2 million barrels a day are about what we now import from the Persian Gulf. Full development of these public resources could also generate over 1.7 trillion, that's a T, $1.7 trillion in government revenue. The development of shale gas also could create big economic benefits. The most impressive U.S. prospect is the Marcellus shale play in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and New York. It is one of the largest natural gas prospects in the world. When other businesses and industry in Pennsylvania and West Virginia were shedding jobs last year, the Marcellus natural gas development, still in its relative infancy, created 57,000 new jobs. A recent study from the Natural Resource Economics Institute concluded. The study also estimates that between 100,000 and 280,000 jobs could be created in 2020 in these three states, with total potential annual revenue to government exceeding over $6 billion. Arkansas also has benefited from oil and natural gas development, as you well know. Oil and gas supports almost 70,000 jobs in the state of Arkansas and are about 6% of your state's economy. Many of the jobs are new, reflecting the stepped up natural gas development. A 2009 report prepared by the University of Arkansas College of Business says that between 2004 and 2008, the oil and gas sector employment rose by more than 120% in Arkansas, compared with less than a 4% increase in the total state employment situation. This oil and natural gas job growth may help explain why Arkansas's unemployment rate, though higher than it should be, today is still below the national average. We can produce more jobs across our nation by developing more of our oil and natural gas resources. Equally important, we protect the environment while doing it. We know development must be done in an environmentally responsible way. We work hard to do that. And frankly, our environmental record is far more positive than many would understand. The Gulf spill was tragic and it was damaging, but it was also unprecedented. Over the past 65 years, the industry has safely drilled more than 40,000 wells in the Gulf of Mexico. The accident in April was a shock. Nothing like it had ever happened before in the U.S. waters. But as unprecedented as the spill was, so too were the response and cleanup and the efforts by the industry and the government to work to reduce the risks of a similar event ever happening again. Regulatory oversight has increased. The industry is reviewing and improving its own standards and producing new guidance for safer operations. And some of our largest oil and natural gas companies are creating state-of-the-art technology to better address any potential deepwater accidents. I might add they have made a $1 billion commitment to a new marine well containment system, and their goal is to build it and to never use it, with the hope and expectation we will prevent any similar accident that occurred in the Gulf this summer. The industry has made progress in other areas as well. Because of cleaner, more fuel-efficient cars and cleaning burning fuels, tailpipe emissions have substantially declined over the decades, and air quality has steadily improved. Even as our population and economy have grown much larger, and the number of miles driven by Americans has risen sharply. It takes 33 of today's new cars to equal the emissions of a single car in 1970. To address climate change, the industry has increased our refinery efficiencies. We've reduced emissions through the use of combined heat and power technology. It has substituted clean-burning natural gas, which, as you know, produces little more than half the greenhouse gas of coal-fired power, for higher emissions fuels. And between 2000 and 2008, and this might surprise many of you here in the room, it invested more than $58 billion in low and no carbon technologies, including renewable fuels. That $58 billion investment on the part of oil and natural gas is larger than either the federal government or the rest of the private sector combined. Since 1990, the industry has spent almost $200 billion on its environmental programs, or $639 for every person in America. That reflects our ongoing commitment to improving environmental performance, even as we produce more energy, more efficiently, to power our economy and to improve our lives. Our strong environmental performance reinforces the argument that producing more domestic oil and natural gas makes sense. However, development doesn't happen wherever and whenever the industry chooses, nor should it. Government policies affect how many projects happen, where they happen, and how fast they can happen. We think government policy should harmonize our energy and environmental goals, encouraging responsible development that creates jobs and helps drive our domestic economy. We need increased access to where oil and natural gas are found, not in national parks or fragile ecosystems, but other places on public lands and waters where energy resources are vast and present. Almost 30% of the nation's land is public land, and our offshore waters are controlled by the government. Companies pay the government billions of dollars annually for leases, for the mere opportunity to look, to explore, to see if there is oil and natural gas. We then pay billions more in royalties once exploration and production begins. We also need common sense regulations that are administered efficiently. Regulations burden every business and family. Every year, no matter what party is in power, the federal government issues thousands of new rules which are layered on top of existing ones. Based on data from the Small Business Administration, the average annual cost of regulation to each American family works out to be $15,000, a sum invisibly buried in the cost of goods and services. Overcomplicated rules increase that burden, not just by requiring businesses to take unnecessary steps with little safety or environmental payoff, but by creating uncertainty and delay that can discourage domestic development and produce new jobs. We're concerned the government's new offshore safety rules will mean a lengthy, unpredictable permitting process. We support much that is in the rules, but if processing permits leads to extended delays, that will reduce investments and job creation. Uncertainty also is an issue with EPA's new greenhouse gas regulations. I'm sure many of you have been following. Millions of businesses, big and small, including refineries, hospitals, shopping malls, apartment buildings, small manufacturers, and many Main Street businesses that emit greenhouse gases, which is literally all of them, will ultimately have to secure a government permit to operate. Although the regulation starts this January, no one yet knows what businesses will have to do to get those permits, when they will get them, or what the new emissions controls will cost. This is going to slow investment and job creation. Good government policy that encourages investment and jobs also means sound and fair tax policy. I know Americans expect the oil and natural gas industry to pay its fair share of taxes, and let me assure you they do. The largest oil and natural gas companies pay income tax at a 70% higher effective rate than other companies represented in the Standard & Poor's Industrial Group. Let me repeat that. The large oil and natural gas companies pay an effective tax rate at 70% higher than the average Standard & Poor industrial company does. In 2006 through 2008, major oil and gas companies paid or incurred roughly $280 billion in taxes. Adding to this tax burden isn't justified and would cost jobs. The nation needs energy and jobs to build the economy and energy to drive it. The U.S. oil and natural gas industry can safely and reliably produce both. Since 2000, U.S. oil and gas companies have invested $2 trillion in new projects, including the green energy and environmental improvements, plus more oil and gas development. Between 2004 and 2007, and this surprises most everyone who hears this important fact, during that window of 3 years, these investments led to the creation of 2 million new jobs throughout our economy. In the months and years ahead, the nation has important decisions to make about its energy future. They may be the kinds of decisions that those of you studying here at the Clinton School will eventually debate and help make. and which all citizens can and should have a say in. They are decisions that will affect real people here in Arkansas and throughout our nation. Whatever decisions we make, it is our hope that we recognize a basic reality. We live and will continue to live in an energy diverse world. We use and will continue to use oil and natural gas even as the energy landscape changes and renewable energy grows in importance. It makes sense to produce more of our own oil and natural gas that we know will be used from domestic supplies here in the United States. That will put hundreds of thousands of Americans to work, produce many billions of dollars in additional revenue for our government, and enhance our energy security. It also will help keep our nation strong and prosperous for many generations to come. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Dean, let me turn it back to you.
A few questions. We've got time for a few questions. If anyone would like to raise their hand and ask Jack a question. Brian?
Hey, Mr. Gerard, thank you very much for being here. I agree entirely with the inevitability of an increase in demand for energy, but I was wondering if you could talk about responsible consumption and explaining to people about gas guzzling cars versus an efficient car and sort of what role that will play in our energy issues.
Great question. Energy efficiency should be a top priority for the entire country. As a nation, we've done much better than we have in the past. We're still not where we should be. I remember well a few years ago when I was working in the chemical industry, we gave out energy efficiency awards, and we had a handful of companies, I believe it was about a dozen that we gave awards to, that over the course of the previous few years prior to that, they had saved enough energy to heat and power Minneapolis for a year. So when you look at it and think of it from an energy efficiency perspective, it should be a top priority for all of us. I might add that the oil and gas molecules from the petrochemical side also assist in that energy efficiency. We talk oftentimes about auto efficiency standards and what we can do to improve the gas mileage in our cars. One of the things they do is to make the cars lighter. The way they've been able to accomplish that is by and large through the use of plastics. Plastics in the United States are developed and driven from the fundamental natural gas molecule. When you think of a chemical facility that produces plastic, it begins as natural gas. So our ability to produce these valuable resources in this country also contribute to the improved energy efficiency that we can accomplish in the country and around the world. So we should not overlook energy efficiency. Our industry takes that seriously. I might add, though some might not agree with this, energy efficiency makes good business. It lowers cost, it improves your performance, and the list goes on. So there's a great motivator for not only business, but for us as individuals. We should stay focused on that and do what we can to use less energy or use it more efficiently.
Questions? Coming right over here.
So as the grandfather to potentially dozens of grandchildren, if you're thinking about their future...
Do you have any daughters that can help me with my sons? Please
No.
let me know. So,
No.
I'm not very successful at that yet, so go ahead.
Okay. So if you're thinking about the world you'd like your grandchildren to live in and have affordable electricity and have reliable fuels and affordable transportation fuels and still have an environment to enjoy, if you could do three things now, if you could change or set three policies at the national level, what would those be?
Policies that are currently being implemented that we should correct, or others? Well, I think a couple things. Let me address it in a broader context, and the way I would describe this is comprehensive energy policy, because it expresses itself in a variety of ways. One of which is, as we look at the greenhouse gas challenge before us, the oil and natural gas industry, as I mentioned earlier, has invested billions of dollars to develop those new technologies. But one of the key things we need to consider and be realistic about is when you transition from various sources of energy, how do you do that in the least disruptive way? As I've just cited to you, the experts say that oil and natural gas will continue to be our primary form of energy well into the future. So we should continue to invest in new forms of energy, but we need to be realistic about what that timeline is. We get in political debates and in the public policy process, oftentimes elected officials will make statements that somehow suggest we can go from A to B in the course of a year or two. That's unrealistic. And it's irresponsible when placed in the context of how we keep affordable, reliable energy for the country as a whole and for all citizens. So within that comprehensive energy policy side, we need to think about that in terms of how do we invest, develop additional forms of energy. The other key aspect of it would be a clear vision as to how we handle the oil and gas components, something obviously I'm very interested in, as I hope you all are as well. We have through the planning process of the Department of Interior what they call a 5-year plan, where they lay out looking forward where those opportunities on government lands might be to develop oil and natural gas. That 5-year plan expires in 2012, and we haven't yet renewed it, and we don't yet know what it will look like. It's another area we should think about so we give long-term vision to energy development in the country. The third piece of it is a combination of energy efficiency as well as the current fuels that we use. Let's use Arkansas as an example, the Fayetteville shale play. Vast quantities of natural gas can come from that play, as well as the Marcellus and Barnett and others that have been discovered around the country. Technology is key to the development of those energies. Natural gas emits half as much carbon as coal does. If we're serious about greenhouse gas reductions, we need to look at the cleaner burning fuels that are abundant, like natural gas, to begin to be used in some of those other functions like electricity generation. And when we do that, it provides us the opportunity to clean the air to improve the environment. At the same time, we have a great opportunity to create jobs and economic recovery. So those are three, but all fall within the broader context of the need for a national comprehensive energy policy.
Jack, Vic, let me ask you this. Do you think that is even a national comprehensive energy policy? Do you think it's even possible, particularly given the very politicized environment in Washington and the tone and the tenor of the 2010 elections and what appears to be happening? I mean, do you think are we in for 2 years of energy gridlock?
Well, it's a great question, and we're going to know here in a couple of weeks what the leadership of the nation looks like, aren't we? And you've got some very important races here in the state of Arkansas that we're all watching from Washington, I might add. But I think the response to that is I've got faith and confidence in the American people. And what I mean by that is ultimately the people that we elect to public office begin right here at home by each of you participating in the process. I think the public is becoming more and more aware and more engaged in that democratic process. I think that will help lessen some of the partisan rancor that has occurred over the years due to close elections, close division, if you will, between political parties. I think the country is at a point right now where we're challenged with economic considerations where they want us to move beyond partisan considerations. Energy should not be a partisan issue. It affects every one of us in an equal way. It's not about Democrats, it's not about Republicans, independents, or anybody else. It's the foundation building block of our society and our economy. And the more we focus on this and leave the politics aside, the better off or the better chance we'll have of developing a comprehensive policy. I can't tell you if that will happen in 2 years, Dean. I don't know if it'll happen in the next 6 months, but it should be a goal of the nation and something we all strive to achieve as soon as possible.
Got a question right here.
Yes, sir. At this time, the EPA seems to be very active in all facets of industry in this country, not just yours. I'm representing the construction industry, and I know how much it's just holding up things and the fear that we're facing. What do you see as a answer to the not in my backyard problem that the refineries are having. We know that everybody in this room gets affected by the availability of gasoline, and we're in the case of asphalt. But what do you see as an answer to how we're going to address having more refineries to serve and be produced in this country?
The challenge you've raised, particularly as it relates to an active EPA, is a very real challenge. Construction, asphalt, refineries, the list goes on. There was a statistic released the other day that shows this particular EPA is far more active than others have been historically in terms of new rulemakings and other things they're trying to achieve. And I think this goes back a little bit to the Dean's question earlier. How do we in the current construct get away from some of the divisive extreme ends of the political equation? A lot of what's being pushed through the EPA is driven by policy aspirations that have not been achieved on Capitol Hill, or the Congress hasn't enacted them. We believe very strongly that the bureaucracy within the EPA should not make public policy. As an administrative executive body, they should implement what the Congress passes. The Congress did not pass a climate bill. The EPA unilaterally on their own should not go out and implement and develop a climate policy on their own. It needs to come first from the elected representatives, and then their role is to implement it and to make it happen. But I think it's a very real challenge for us. And when you look at the political situation now, it could be that you'll see the Congress continue to stalemate, but EPA just continues on their way. And it's going to have significant consequences for the public and for the economy. So, again, I've got faith the public's going to eventually speak out, and the message is going to be heard, and there'll be some corralling of that activity.
Any other questions? Ladies and gentlemen, we're glad to have Jack Gerard here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thank you.